is Isabel Fish, and I'm here with Alice Stori. We are at Somerset House in London for the Collect Art Fair, and today I have the great privilege to be welcomed by the Irish Design and Craft Council and an incredible group of makers and artists who are, most of them are here. It's a little intimidating for me and a little overwhelming, and I'm just so humble and grateful. You know Alice, she is the founder of the Schloss Hollenegg Foundation. We did an event with her at her castle last year, and Alice curated the exhibition today, and she's going to tell you all about it. So I'm going to go behind the camera, and because it's really not about me, it's about Alice, it's about the artists, and it's about this extraordinary body of work that you're going to have the privilege of seeing today. Alice, so wonderful to see you again.
Yeah, and in person for once.
In person. So
it's really lovely.
You curated the exhibit for the portfolio project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so I was invited by the Design and Craft Council in Ireland as a judge to select the portfolio makers, and the work started about a year ago. So it was very exciting to discover so many Irish artists and makers. And we then had a first exhibition at Donernail Court in Ireland, which took place in July. And now for Collect, I was asked again to select only 12 makers, which was very hard. So we have a wonderful selection of artists, which are all Irish or living in Ireland.
And what was the guiding theme for this selection for Collect?
So it was very important for me to find a theme. So not to obviously all of the designers and makers that were selected for portfolio are all extraordinary. So it was important for them to feel that there wasn't anyone better than the others. So it was very important to find a theme, and the theme was very much about their interpretation of nature. So all the projects that we selected are either inspired by nature or are made with natural materials, or are kind of some kind of representation, or work very much with very interesting textures which remind us of natural elements. So that was a little bit the theme. Another important criteria for me was that all pieces would be more or less the same size, and they would all be presented on a very even level. So that was something which I took great care when I made the selection.
So we're going to go and look around, and I have to do a little panorama here because you have to see this incredible grouping of amazing artists. Thank you so much. Before we go here, so I did a little bit of research about the importance of nature and the Irish culture, and it's clearly very important. So here we have Cara, and she's a silversmith, and maybe you want to tell a little bit about how you made these specific pieces.
Yeah, so this project was based at the edge of the Atlantic, where I took discs of silver and actually hammered into the rocks on the beach. So as a silversmith, I'm quite often working in my workshop with natural materials and with other materials alongside the silver. But in this project, I actually took the workshop outside and hammered in the landscape and in the environment.
So when we're looking at your work here, is that the rocks, the marking of the rocks that we can see?
Yes, so depending on, I went to several different beaches, and depending on the different beach, the different rock formation meant that as I hammered, I was getting a very different texture with each different individual bowl.
And what was the inspiration to go to the edge of the world?
Yes, so I suppose with lockdown and we couldn't travel in Ireland, I applied to the RDS Irish Craft Bursary and was very fortunate to win that and to allow me to start this project and to do this. So yes, it started with lockdown and not being able to travel and not being able to get to that edge of the Atlantic, and I've had a really interesting time now just hammering and being completely immersed in nature.
And the technical challenge of hammering silver on rock, tell us a little bit about that.
The most technical challenge was the weather. In Ireland it rains and it's cold, so that was the most technically. That and the tides. But no, it has been a really fantastic project. I took a little torch with me. I was able to, anneal the silver while I was working so that I could keep it soft, so I could keep hammering it. And so I haven't done anything else with the work once I didn't do anything with it back in the workshop. It was sanded with sand, cleaned with seaweed, and really keeping that raw sense of the work.
If I may add something, I think what's interesting is that also it's this very rough surface, but then the form is a very kind of precise geometrical. So I think that's also that aspect about this contrast of something which is clearly man-made and very precisely man-made, and then this kind of roughness on the underneath.
It's amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Sorry, I didn't mention before Cara Murphy because I only said Cara first.
Thank you. Thank you. This is amazing.
So I'm meeting actually Nuala O'Donovan for the first time. Yes, at last. So it's very exciting. And Nuala is a ceramicist, and she's going to tell us a little bit about where these shapes come from.
Well, my work, I'm interested in pattern, in structural pattern, and how natural forms go together. So my work is all built, and what I do is I do studies of one particular plant or organism, I isolate one pattern, and then a lot of the patterns that I take are from what traditionally would have been regular geometry, which relates to classical geometry, because I'm interested in the history of art and basing my work within that, tradition. So these are both based on the teasel. And so each piece, because it's individually built, or they're made in sequence, so each piece is different. They're never replicated. And each piece, in a sense, is an experiment in seeing how the pattern works. This one is sort of a hybrid of sponges, and so it's underwater and teasel. A lot of people kind of interpret them as underwater pieces, but that would be kind of part of my research, looking at geometry and how forms evolve. And these are based on fractal geometry. They're built according to those rules. So that's pretty much.
And is this an evolution of your work, or is it something that has always been the geometry? Has it always been in your work?
Well, my background was in architecture and design. And so there's always been an awareness of geometry and aesthetics. And the golden section and the Fibonacci series, all of that kind of thing, which goes into design. And I'm a career changer. I started making work in 2005, and then did a master's in Cork at the Crawford College there, and I was kind of able to indulge my love of pattern, which I couldn't do when I was working, because architects have a little bit of an abhorrence of pattern and
we're now moving to silver.
Yes, so we have here from Annemarie Reinhold, unfortunately she's not with us now. So Annemarie is a silversmith. She works very much in detail. She works again as well also with a lot of natural elements. Here we have 3 different spoons, which are vegetables. So you can see there's a beet and a carrot and a radish. And even have pieces which are more practical, as a spoon could be, they're very much like jewelry. So it's very much about the small detail and about constructing the silver more like a jewelry maker rather than larger artistic objects. And here we have Cathy Burke, and Cathy's with us. So,
hello, Cathy. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So this does not look like what it is.
Okay, that's probably because it's layered and layered and layered with lots of glazing. So the ideas come from nature, from the landscape, from my...
So maybe we have to say that it's ceramic.
Oh yes, sorry, yes, originally ceramic. But yeah, based on ideas from my local landscape and the local environment, but also ideas of the environment. I take pieces of plants and amalgamate forms to create forms, and then we'll use different surfaces to kind of create rocky crevices and emulate the mosses and lichens of my area. And it's important to reference the mosses and lichens in my work because they're a signifier of a healthy environment. You know, that in high polluted areas, lichens die out, and they're really, really important to reference that this is a thing that's happening. And, you know, I'm lucky that where I come from, I see this every day. Mm-hmm. I see this in reality, but it's slowly slipping away.
It looks like you actually have baked the lichen in there. It's quite remarkable. So the lichen and the mussels and all that are, it's almost like the canary in the coal mine, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly your message.
Yeah, this is blown glass from the furnace that was inspired by the part of the country that I live in, which is in the far north of Ireland, close to the Giant's Causeway, where there's a lot of rocky kind of tide pools and rock pools along the coast. And so this was kind of inspired by the sea life and the plant life that occurs up there on the coast. It's just about 2 miles from where the glassblowing studio is.
So do you go on walks and observe, and then do you do drawings? Do you take photos? How does that work?
It's not really descriptive per se. It's more just sort of inspired by kind of that feeling of looking through a depth of water. And glass is a particularly kind of suitable material for doing that. It has a depth to it, the transparency. It looks kind of watery, like you're looking through some transparent surfaces. The technique that's used to make these pieces is actually derived from 16th century Italian techniques where the body of a glass vessel is pieced together, so out of distinct pieces of glass, and then made into a vessel form. So all the individual pieces of glass, those components, comprise the wall of the vessel.
So could you show us on one of the pieces, the various
Well, you can sort of
elements?
see these different sort of cell structures there. Those are all separate pieces of glass. And as those are fused together, and as the blown form is stretched and inflated, and shaped by centrifugal force and gravity, the glass, because it's fluid at that point, it's a very plastic material, sort of reflects that process. So it's there's some consonance between the way form changes in heat, you know, subjected to those forces, because it's always moving around when you're working with it, and kind of what I'm visually sort of recording as as you look into the surface, through the surface of the water.
Okay, and how much prediction can you do on what the final product will be? I mean, is it fairly precise, or is it?
I know it's not precise. And you said, do you draw? And it's not so much that, it's more like a process of collage, because you're piecing together these elements, making it into a vessel, and then forming it. And you're making creative decisions along the way, but really a lot of the composition, a lot of the decisions about color and pattern and line are made before you start that blowing process.
Good. Thank you so much. I like the collage in glass. I think it's a really interesting composition and language. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very much. So these are 3 oak vessels made from a single oak tree. The tree grew close to my studio, and it died, so it had to be cut down. And I suppose they're slightly unusual in the way I've made them, with the grain going through the piece, which means that you can see the pit which was the center of the tree. And that's something I haven't done before. Usually the center of the tree would be seen as waste material, but in these particular pieces, it was in good enough condition in order to actually make it the center of the individual vessel.
Maybe you could pick up one of the pieces and show us the various elements of it.
So you look at this piece here, you can see here, this little hole. So that was the center of the oak tree, and it runs right through the piece to the other side.
Right.
And I found that worked quite well with this particular form, which I've made before, but not with the pit running through, because all this material around the hole is end grain, which is much weaker than the rest of the vessel on the other sides. So where I've made the cut and steamed the piece, which is at 90 degrees to the pit, the wood is much more, it's got much more strength. It allows steam bending and the folding, which puts quite a bit of pressure on the material. It allows that to, I suppose, it allows the steaming to be successful so that the piece doesn't break during the process.
And how do you select the tree?
Well, this tree was one of the last oak trees that was near my studio. So my home place is actually the oak, and it's the town's land. So originally, I suppose it was an oak forest, but at this stage, there's not very many oak trees left because they've been cut down over the centuries. So I knew that when this one had to come down, it was maybe one of the last for maybe a couple of 100 years. So I had to be careful with it and make pieces that were special, I suppose.
You actually made more than 3, because if I remember correctly, there's more of them on that.
There is a few more, but I'm actually keeping the center of the tree, and I've got it planked, and I'm going to make my own kitchen from it. Because I'm building a house on the same field as the tree came down, so I'm keeping most of it for myself.
So you'll never move?
I suppose not.
Emma works with glass, and she's got a very precise interest in botany and really understanding also, for example, the medicinal plant characteristic of plants. She's also interested in how in the history plants were used for different purposes. She also goes and researches a little bit magical plants and folklore around different kind of plants and flowers. And the way she...
So these pieces, I was specifically looking at getting these kind of bunches to get that whole idea of the vigorous raw landscape, the kind of idea of mass and the sort of beauty and the invigorating quality of being out in the landscape and seeing this kind of wildness and this rawness. And taking those bunches and then combining them with very, very, very simple hand-hammered silver vessels. So the vessels are very, very similar simple forms. I try to keep the handles quite minimum, and then I kind of bind them together using linen threads. So it's vintage Irish linen threads. It's a thread I always go back to. I just really like the material quality of it, and I quite like making that kind of connection between the elements very visible. So you can see the element of the hand and the artist's eye in the whole making process in the piece. So it's kind of trying to get all those elements of being in the landscape, the idea of making, the idea of process, and the idea of line and arrangement all coming together in one piece.
And
Alison, nice to meet you.
these pieces are ceramics, and they're very unusual in the surface quality. So maybe
yes, they're foil built. Each piece takes quite a long time to refine the surface, and when I've got it very smooth, and then I put on a slip, because the clay has quite a lot of grog and grit in it, so the slip gives a nice surface for the terra sigillata, which goes on when it's bone dry. And then the color, each piece kind of, I have to really think quite a lot about what color would suit the form. So I put oxides into the terra sigillata, and then I put on layers which are polished with terra sigillata. The clay particles are so fine, so that you can polish the surface, and then they're fired to high biscuit firing. And after that, I put resists of a mesh, various mesh fabrics that I find. And I mix clay and sand and smear that over the mesh, peel away the fabric, and then I smoke fire them, which gives this kind of pattern.
Can we talk about the shape?
The shapes come from, well, my absolute love of nature and gardening and seed pods. Also, I influenced by,
You can say that it's also cars and motors and
yes.
engines.
My father was a racing driver in his youth, and there was always cars and aerodynamic forms coming to my work as well. So.
And these are also pieces made out of ceramic. And the way that Jennifer works is she makes all the individual, they're kind of like very small, little bit like feathers, very small pieces of ceramic. And then she makes little holes in all of them. And once they are fired, then she sews them onto a kind of net, which is then makes this shape. So actually all these individual pieces are all single, and it's quite incredible work the way that she does it, and it's very precise and very delicate. So it's kind of this idea of, again, we have a very perfect round shape, but then we have something that reminds us of feathers or fish skin. So it's again this little bit of this contrast. These are all porcelain.
The detail on the edges,
Yes.
is quite remarkable.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Nice to see you again. Nice to see you too.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. This is a big, big piece.
This is, I am still using the material of milk bottles and waste plastic. And this piece was inspired by looking at the deep vents in the ocean where you think that there's no life, but actually it's teeming with life inside there. And I was thinking of the plastic that gets washed into the ocean and how in years to come, I was fantasizing what might happen to that and what it might grow into. And so this is one of my pieces, Ocean Dandelion. And I like to let the plastic kind of lead. I spend a lot of time playing with different pieces of plastic to see how it reacts and to see how I can use it.
And then there's the embroidery work.
Yes. I put plastic in under the sewing machine and I stitch it. And I found that to be very satisfying as a process to work. I used to use linen and silks, and when I've started using plastic, it has a dimensionality that you don't really get with floppy fabric. Kind of, you can stiffen plastic up and really get structure out of it. So I'm finding it fascinating. I really enjoy working with it, you know, and I think more people should.
So I work with resins, and this is an obelisk, which is part of a new series. And I wanted to work with different materials. I work with different plants and natural materials that I collect and embed in the resin. So this has actually had 40 castings in it to suspend these seaweeds in a sort of seamless way. And the piece is kind of like traditional obelisks, which are sort of homage to the sun. And this is about the red seaweeds that were the seaweeds that are formed in the deep, dark corners of the seabed. And they're the oldest forms of life. They found in India, they found fossils that had red seaweeds from over 2 billion years ago. So reds became browns, which became green seaweeds, and then went on to land and have the plants that we know today. So these are really old, and it's kind of about their quest for the sun.
It's amazing. It's incredible, and I love the contrast of the story, the ancient origins, and the very contemporary material. It's very striking. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much to all of you. And we're going to let the crowds back in because I think that they are chomping at the bit there. I just want to give a last tour. Alice, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.